Hey folks, welcome back to Code Stories. My name is Nathaniel. I'm an iOS developer from Berlin, Germany. It has been a while since I posted a video on this channel, and the main reason is because about 2 months ago we had a baby. Yeah, we had a baby. My wife had a baby, and have been busy supporting her with the baby and with other two children. So we have in total 3 kids, and it's a lot of work. For those of you who are parents, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's going to take a while before I can get back to my old routine, so please bear with me. And for those of you who have been sticking around, thank you very much for your support. I really, really appreciate it. So now let's talk about this episode. The name of my guest is Anton. Anton is originally from Russia. He transitioned from neuroscience to sales, and he's currently the co-CEO of Coda Staffing. So Coda Staffing is a company that's solely focused on equipping companies with the best software developers from Eastern Europe, and they're using a concept called outstaffing. It's a very interesting concept, and it's different from the traditional IT recruitment model. And so in this episode, we're going to dive deep into outstaffing. We're going to talk about the benefits, the pros, the cons, what it is, and compare it with older models. I hope you're going to enjoy it. So stay tuned and have fun. Hello, Anton. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
You're welcome. How are you doing?
Good, good. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. There's a game called Metro.
Uh-huh.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I
It's
did.
some kind of a post-apocalyptic game.
Yeah, I think it's based on the novel
Yeah,
of,
exactly.
of the Russian
Eh,
writer, but I
Yeah,
didn't read it. But everyone around me did. So,
yeah, and the main character is called Antion.
uh-huh.
So when I saw your name the first time, I was like, okay, should I say Anton or Antion? And then your last name, Kalashnikov.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was also interesting to read, and I was like, okay, is he related with Mikhail Kalashnikov, the guy who found the AK-47? I was like, okay, if that's the case, then we're gonna have some really interesting topics.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not related to him, and I can explain actually the story behind the last name. So Kalashnikov actually, um, so kalach in Russian means kind of the same thing as pretzel does. So it's like a heart-shaped pastry, although kalach is a little bit more sweet than the German pretzel. So Kalashnikov is the guy who bakes pretzels. So it's like a typical professional last name. Yeah, but the funny thing also is that since my first name is Anton and my last name is Kalashnikov, then the combination is like AK. So that was my nickname at school.
Oh, great, great. Well, thanks for coming in, and maybe you want to just give a short introduction, who you are, or where you're from,
Sure.
and what you're doing in Berlin.
Yeah. I'm originally from Moscow. Studied first psychology, then biology. Was doing some research in neuroscience. Then transferred from neuroscience to sales. And that's what I do right now in Berlin. And I'm interested in a lot of different things as well as that. So it's like, um,
Oh, interesting. So you were into neuroscience,
mhm.
and then you decided to move to sales. How come?
Yeah. So the problem with I was doing fundamental research, right? The problem with fundamental research is that the work cycle is very long. It takes a lot of time from um, finding something out to publishing it to actually seeing your paper, and then in many years perhaps seeing the results of your research in industry. So that was very frustrating for me. The second reason for me to leave neuroscience was that it's not a lot of human contact there. Um, and so I decided to go into the industry. However, the neurotech industry, the pure kind of counterpart in the industry for neuroscience, is a very limited space. There are only a few companies that do something there. So I decided, what can I do where I could talk to people, I can interact with them, and at the same time it would be industry. And I decided that sales is the most simple choice for me.
And how was the transition to sales?
Um, I mean, it was quite fun actually. My first company, the first company I worked with, I only worked with them for a few months, but they did actually biotech. It was a biotech company. We created a test system for cancer, for women specific cancers, so ovarian cancer, breast cancer. But I was doing a different thing there. I was actually selling educational courses related to genetic tests. So that was really interesting because I had to talk to a lot of people, and I also kind of took part a little bit in the production of the courses. But of course, it's a lot of new stuff. At the same time, I would say it's a relatively easy field to transition if your personality fits with it, because then the barrier to entry is not so high as in some other fields, right? So
So if you're someone who can talk, you actually, or who have, let's say, a good vibe to other people, yeah, and
yeah,
yeah, it's, let's say, you have a good chance of surviving in sales.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would say. But I mean, of course, if you only want to talk all the time, then it's not going to work. If you also like 100% introverted, then it's also going to be a problem. If you're in the middle, then you're good. And most people are somewhere in the middle if they enjoy doing that. Also, it seems that sales is not very often about pushing something or forcing someone to buy something. It's more about the research. It's more about how do I find my perfect customer? How do I find the person who has this problem that I can't solve right now?
Was that your first stop?
Yeah.
And then after that, you moved to another company.
Yeah. After that, I moved to a company called Lingoda.
Lingoda,
They're also
okay.
Berlin based. They sell language education.
Okay, so from breast cancer to language.
Mhm.
All right. So and that was also something you were actually, or were you trying to like just look into different fields in sales and check, okay, which one fits my, let's say, my expectations?
To be honest, I'm very passionate about languages and learning different languages. So I learned English almost by myself to the current level. I learned German also almost completely by myself to I don't know, B2 C1. And so Lingotto was a perfect place for someone who's interested in education and languages. And so
All right. And where was the next stop after Lingoda?
there was the company where I work currently.
Uh,
It's called Coder Staffing.
Coda staffing. Interesting. I think we're going to be talking a lot about Coda staffing. And so right now you are the co-CEO of Coda staffing.
Yeah.
And how did that happen?
Well, so it's an interesting story. The company is kind of like a family business. So my one of my best friends, one of my closest friends, his fiance was leading the recruitment efforts in Coder Staffing. Her best friend was one of the co-founders of Coder Staffing, and um, the cousin of her best friend is the CEO of Coder Staffing. So it kind of all fits together. Then they realized that there's nobody to lead any business development efforts, and I was the first choice.
Okay. And how is it? How does it feel to be a CEO? How's your experience been till now? Enjoying it?
I mean, it's a lot of responsibility, and I prefer to say co-CEO or sometimes head of business development, because still, like the CEO takes also more responsibility than I do. but yeah, it's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of decisions that you need to take by yourself, where nobody could tell you how to do it. And you kind of very often you're the first one to be in this position. So it's not that people don't want to help you; they just could not help you. But it's also quite fun because you feel like you're in control of what happens, and if something goes wrong, it's probably because of you. So that's good.
And how many employees does Coda Staffing have?
I would say that we have right now 6 full-time employees, and then um, about five part-time employees, and then all the developers that work through us. And I can't say the exact number, but it's between 30 and 50.
Okay, so it's still kind of a startup vibe, I
Yeah,
guess.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And what's the product? What does Coda Staffing has to offer?
Coder Staffing helps companies to hire remote full-time developers for long-term cooperation. Um, should I explain the business model?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, so the business model is called outstaffing. What it means is that if you want to hire remote full-time employees long-term, then you have a few different options as the business owner, right? You can open for, and then you need to you probably want to get the best price quality ratio when you hire these developers. You want to get the best quality of developers for the lowest possible price, and then if and then the market just evolved in such a way that those developers usually come from Eastern Europe, because the quality of the technical qualifications there are very, very high. The salaries are relatively low, just the market. This is how it works. And so what you can do is you can open an office in the country. But for small companies, it's a very complicated task to do. It's daunting. You need to get someone who knows the language, who knows the rules and the regulations. And in the long run, for a big company, it might make sense. Your second best option, especially if you're a small company, your first best option is outstaffing. So what it means is we hire a developer for you specifically. We ensure that the developer speaks the language, is technically qualified, and there's a cultural fit between them and your team. And then we hire this developer, and on paper, this developer works for us, but in reality, they work for you as a client, full-time, long-term. So that's basically how it works. It's the mechanics.
And so you think this option, outstaffing, is more, let's say, affordable for smaller companies?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly, I mean, depending on what we're talking about, like most of our customers come from the U.S., so most of my examples I would base on the U.S. reality. However, I know that you might have some European clients. For Europe, it also would work. It's just the numbers would be a little different.
And you guys are only solely focused on Russian developers, right?
We have developers from Eastern Europe in general, but I would say 70% of them come from Russia.
From
Yes.
Russia, okay. Let's say, looking into the future, are you guys planning to like get more developers from other countries, from other continents, or is it like this is the place you want to stay and it's working, and don't change a broken system? No, don't change your working system. And or is it like, yeah, any changes in the future?
No, I think that yeah, don't mess up with success. It works perfectly right now. There are a few. Well, we actually expanded recently to Armenia, so we have now developers also coming from Armenia. But we probably would not go outside of the Eastern Europe, and there are a few reasons for us to stay there. We have a really strong network there. All of our recruiters, they worked in big IT companies in Russia and Belarus, and so they know the market, they know people, and it's usually very easy for us to know, having the cultural background, having the relevant cultural background in the language. Um, we can actually do a pretty decent background check. We can do technical qualifications check,
Mm.
and because of the strong network, all the developers that we hire, they usually are 1 to 2 calls away from us. So it's usually either someone that we already know or someone who knows someone.
Mm. So I read something in your website,
Mhm.
Coda Staffing, and I think found something that said that outstaffing is very, very similar to traditional recruitment.
Mhm.
Can you give us some insight what you mean by that? Because at the end of the day, it's for me the first time I heard about outstaffing, it sounds very much like outsourcing
Mhm.
and few elements of what was it called? Just uh, I can remember the term, but it
Freelancing.
freelancing exactly.
Mm.
Sorry,
Mhm.
it's very much like freelancing. And I was like, okay, why is what makes it so special,
Mm.
right?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it seems like you find someone, a developer for a
Mhm.
certain company for your client,
Right.
and how is the relationship? Who is the boss?
Mhm.
What about a contract? Is the developer going to sign two contracts
Mhm.
for your company and for the client?
Mhm.
And if the developer wants to quit, who is the developer supposed to reach first, and
Mhm.
who has the last words? And it's kind of, I don't know.
Right. Well, yeah, it's in terms of how the system works. Of course, it's different from the recruitment, from the direct hire, but it's the closest one compared with outsourcing, freelancing, and other things. So how it works is the developer signs a contract with us. We sign a contract with the developer and with the client. Now the developer works for us, through us, for the client. At the same time, we don't control um, what developer is working on. We don't manage the developer. The developer is being managed only by the company, by the client. They have a direct relationship, even though on paper it's not direct. It's through us as a middleman. Um, but yeah, and in this sense, you hire another employee, and there's no difference when working with this employee apart from the paperwork.
Mm.
So in this sense, it's almost like a direct hire.
Okay. What's the difference between outstaffing and outsourcing?
So in outsourcing, what you do is you outsource a certain task, and there are certain deliverables at the end, right? So for instance, the client wants to develop an iOS app, so then they outsource it to a different company that makes the app and then brings it back. We don't control the developers ourselves. We just show you the people, we give you the people, and then you, together with those developers, work on whatever you're interested in. So that's kind of a difference in how the work
Hmm.
progresses.
And in that case, isn't outsourcing cheaper?
No, it's usually actually quite more expensive, because imagine what happens. The client says, "Okay, we need to develop this thing." Um, then the CTO, if the company is big enough, then they usually have a CTO and a technical project manager, the client, I mean. So the CTO tells it to the technical project manager. The technical project manager writes the technical requirements. Then they send these requirements to the outsourcing company. Now, on outsourcing end, that receives a technical project manager on their end. And now they ask the developer, "Hey, John, how much time do you think it would take you to do this thing, to make it work?" And he's like, "Well, in all honesty, it's probably 1 month." Then the technical project manager is like, "Okay, so then I should probably tell our client that it's going to take 2 months." Not because we are bad, not because we want to put more hours, or to get more money from the client, but just because we're not sure that it's actually going to take 1 month, we don't know. You never know with a project like that. And so and they are very afraid all the time to under deliver and over promise. So they want to stay in terms. And then they say, okay, it's going to take two months. After that, so you pay, let's say you pay X to the developer. Then you also pay taxes. Let's imagine that 20%. So you get 1.2x that you pay. Then you pay for the project manager who manages different developers working in different projects. So that's another, let's say, 20%. Now, because the company is afraid that they're not going to deliver in time, they stretch out the time a little bit, just to make sure that everything works fine. So then you pay for this time stretch as well. After that, the problem with outsourcing companies is that it only works if you have a stable incoming flow of clients. If you constantly take new clients and new projects, otherwise it doesn't work, because it very rarely happens that an outsourcing company has a long-term cooperation with one client. Because of that, you need to have a sales department or sales and marketing department. So you need to pay for that. So that's also included in the price now, right? So that's another 15 to 20%. And also, you always need to include in the price certain things related to risks. The client might drop out, and you want to cover for that. So that's another 15%, usually. And then and then in the end, the company also wants to earn some money, so they also have to have certain margin. If you combine all of these things, it would make the actual price for you to outsource the project 3.5 to 4.5 times higher than the actual amount of money they paid for the developer. Even if the developer's salary is really low, it's still way more than if you would just have an employee that you manage yourself. And here we're only talking about the outsourcing companies that operate in good faith. Like if they operate in bad faith, then they could also put more hours, bring more people into the project just to make it seem big and just to take more money from you. And also because of the nature of the outsourcing, the long chain of communication disrupts it, right? Because CTO talks to their client's CTO, talks to the client's technical project manager, who talks to the outsourcing project manager, who talks to the outsourcing developer. This is way too many people.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
So that's kind of the problem.
All right. Do you get a one-time payment, or is it like a regular payment, monthly payment from your client? So the longer the employee stays in the company, the developer stays in the company with your client, the better for you.
Yes. So that's true. The longer they stay with us, the better it is for us. There's no one-time payment in the beginning. There's no headhunter's fee. That's how we're different from the recruitment agencies. It's one of the ways we're different from the recruitment agencies. That's that. Also, the fact that we benefit from the long-term cooperation. This is kind of what makes the system tick. That's what makes it ideal for many customers, because it ensures that all of the incentives are aligned. We want to find the developer who is interested in the company and is interested in what they do enough to stay with them for a long time. Developer, and most of our developers are senior developers, so mid seniors, so 6+ years. Most of them are 10+ years of experience. They usually have a family, kids. They want something stable, so they're also interested in working long term. And the client, of course, is also is not interested in someone who's going to quit after 3-4 months.
So you're only looking into let's say fixed contract, not like project based things, right? Like let's say project is going to take half a year. You don't your clients do not only offer fixed contracts?
So our contracts do not have a specific term. So
Uh,
the client pays month to month, which is our way to kind of ensure that everything is transparent. You can quit anytime. We are confident enough in what we offer that we're sure that you're going to stay with us after that. Um, and um, and yeah, you asked me something else. You said,
if it's like project-based contracts.
yeah, I mean, we had a lot of different cases where we kind of strayed a little bit from the traditional, from the ideal outstaffing scenario. So we had clients where we did a project-based work. We prefer not to do that. Um, for the same reasons I explained before, because the developers that we hire, they don't want to work for half a year for a company. They want to work longer. But if it seems that the client has a project and that project might evolve into something more long-term, then of course we can do that too.
Okay, interesting. And talking about the relationship between the developers and your company and the client. Let's say, for example, something bad happens, God
Mm-hmm.
forbid,
Yeah.
Coda staffing goes bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens to your developers? Do they continue working for your clients, or are they going to also have to
Well,
terminate the contract?
Well, that's a very, very unique scenario. I mean, I think that if we go bankrupt, then there will be no problems for the companies to rehire the developers directly. Of course, I mean, of course, there will be problems for them to do that, but not because of us, right? They would have to solve all legal issues when it comes to hiring someone abroad. And usually, since these companies are small, they don't have an office there, so they would have to deal with all immigration-related issues. But they can do that. It's possible. Like we don't. If we go under, then what stops them from doing that?
Okay. And talking about legal issues,
Mm-hmm.
so why should companies uh, um, hire, or let's say ask you to get them developers instead of doing it themselves?
Mm.
They can just like go on LinkedIn, look for developers in Russia or wherever, and just reach out to them and say, hey, you want to work for us remotely, and let's do it.
Yeah, so there are a few reasons why it's cheaper and it's faster with us. So one reason is because traditional sourcing channels, they do not exist, or they operate differently in Eastern Europe and in Russia. LinkedIn is banned in Russia right now.
Oh, okay.
So it's not that you can't use it. You can have a VPN and then you can use it, but that's just another reason for people not to open an additional social media. And so people don't sign up right now. That's one thing. Second, and so those companies, they want to hire remote developers from Eastern Europe. They just need to know all of those intricacies. How do you source the developers? How do you talk to them? What things do you check? And the cultural differences, they could not be underestimated. Like they exist. So you need to check with them too. And if you don't have, a Russian IT recruiter who works for the company, they would not be able to check that. And if it's a big company, well, they can just open an office. So they're not. They might not be an ideal client for us. So that's one reason. The second reason, if they want to hire a remote developer, they need to be sure that they stay on the right side of the law. And that can be quite complicated. The US immigration law is quite easy to trespass, sort of. So you need to hire a special attorney who would deal with all of those things. And the payroll can be complicated. So we deal with all of those things. So we basically, what we offer is we say, we find you the person, we vet the person, we make sure that they are a good technical and cultural fit for your company, that they speak the language. And we also deal with all the paperwork that would involve hiring someone remotely. And in the end, if they, if because we are an American company, and our headquarters are in Philadelphia, because of that, if something really bad happens, although it never happened before, but still, if like many American I just say that because many American clients, they ask about Russian hackers, and so we usually tell them, hey, we are an American company, we're present on American soil. If you want to sue us, you can. You better not, but you can. You can. It's your choice. So that kind of also provides an additional sense of security.
Okay. So you are, most of your developers are senior developers.
Correct.
And that means most of them have at least 5-6 years of experience. They live in Russia. They speak Russian and they work for a Russian company. And now most of them, let's say, and then you reach out to these people, to these developers, and you give them an offer, or you present them something like, hey, there's this company looking for your skill set. Are you interested? And the companies, like you already mentioned, are mostly based in America, right? And when it comes to language barrier, how is it? Because as a software developer, I work with people from all over the globe, and sometimes it's not that easy to let's say decode or descript what the fellow developer is trying to tell me, right? Especially if it's a developer who has a really strong accent, and Russians are not the exception, right? And a lot of Russian developer, a lot of Russian people still have this really strong Russian accent.
Right.
So how is it for developers who have been really fixed in working in Russia and now they should work for an American company? How do you guys deal with that issue?
Well, that's true. Among Russian people, like, Russians are not known for their English fluency, so we have to find the ones that speak the language good enough to work with American clients and to be able to do their job. There are a few ways to kind of check that beforehand. If there's no additional information, if we don't know anything, like what we can look at is if the developer worked for an international company before, even if they worked in a Russian office. Still, very often, international companies who just have a presence in Russia, they have to do like stand-ups in English, or weekly reviews in English, and therefore they would have a higher exposure, so it's more likely that they would speak a good, fluent English. Or alternatively, maybe they lived in England or in the UK, in Australia, in the US before that. Or maybe they worked for an American company before that. So all of those things would probably ensure that they speak good English. Or we just ask and we just check that.
All right. And how is the success rate of getting the developers for your clients? Let's say you have let's say 10 requests from your clients. They're looking for 10 developers, 10 different clients looking for 10 developers. How is the success rate? Is it like 10 to 10 or 8 to 10 or 5 to 10 or?
I mean, as a scientist, I could never say 10 to 10, like 100% of something that very rarely happens. That probably makes it like a universal law. So I would say like 9.7.
Oh, wow, that's pretty high.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can find developers for almost any client, almost any kind of developers. The question is, how much time would it take? Right, so there are certain developers that would be easier for us to find and easier for us to check, and we can provide them with like higher, like more of those developers, right? So for instance, backend, front end, iOS, Android, all of those things are full stack web development. All of those things are relatively easy for us. There are some more complicated, more rare things to find. Let's say a video engineer with um,
Some embedded stuff, embedded developers.
yeah. All those that can be that just would take a little bit more time because uh, maybe we never did that before. Maybe it would be the first time for us to work with this very specific technology, and then we have a less prominent network there, so we would have to make more calls than what I said before, right? So usually it's 1-2 calls away from us, but in this case it would be like 6-7 calls away. But it would happen at the end anyway.
Mm. Do you have a pool of developers, and if so, how do you fill those pools? Do you bring in How do you bring in new developers? Do you just go like in German you say Kaltakquise, just reach out to developers and say, hey, you want to be a part of this awesome company, and then you add them to your pool. On how do you guys do that?
No, I mean we don't really we have a pool of people that we know and we worked with before, and because they are happy staying with us and working through us for American companies, for American clients, then of course they also bring their friends here and they say, hey, by the way, if you need an Android developer, 6 years of experience, this guy, then give me a call. So this is kind of how the network feels it, mostly using the word of mouth.
Okay.
But we rarely do cold outreach. We do it sometimes, again, as I said, especially with rare technologies, or if we have a really big request, like if the company says, oh, we need 20 WordPress developers. Well, it's probably 300 WordPress developers in Russia in general. Like that's it. That's probably all the pool of the developers. So then we would have to, of course, do some cold outreach.
Okay. Has there ever been a scenario where your client wanted your developers to move to America?
That has not happened before, but we are open for that.
Oh,
Like
okay.
if
Interesting.
that happens, we of course it depends on the relationship between all of us, right? So if we see that they're both in love with each other, right? So developer says, "Oh, I love this company. I want to work with them directly." The company says, "Oh, we would love to give this employee additionally to the salary that we transfer through you guys. We also want to offer them some portion of the company, some equity." If it's just the equity, we say, "Okay, you do it around us. You don't need to cut us off here." If you say we want to stay with this developer for a long time and maybe we want them to move to the US, or we want to hire them directly, then we say, okay, then there's a buyout option basically in the contract.
Oh, okay.
So they need to pay fixed amount after a few months, after we see that they work, that there's a fit, and they say, okay, now we want to work directly, legally, then we say, okay, you just pay us a buyout, and then you can do that.
Okay. Do you have competitors?
Sure, there are other companies that do similar things.
Okay. And how is your relationship with?
I mean, we're competitors. We look at each other and we see what others are doing, but usually the companies they just choose a very specific niche thing that they focus on, and so we're not really competing like all the time in all for all clients, right? So for instance, we have a few special things about us. That we focus on very senior developers. I said 6+, but it's mostly 10+ years of experience. We only focus on Eastern Europe, nothing else. We don't do project-based work. There are no additional people that we bring into the conversation with the client. It's only me who talks to them first, developer who would work with them at the end, and the recruiter who brought the developer in. And so that's it.
Okay. Let's say a small company who are looking for developers are watching this podcast or
Mm.
listening to this podcast,
Hmm.
and they're pretty small. Let's say they're just like maybe 10 people,
Hmm.
and they think, hey, maybe we should reach out to Coda Staffing.
Hmm.
How do they know if they have the budget? How do they know if they have the right, let's say, if they're big enough or if they are actually qualified
Hmm.
to, yeah, to reach out to you? Or is it, do you have some, do you have, I don't know, some requirement, like you have to have at least 50 employees, and you have
Hmm.
to be as this big, you have to have this budget and all this kind of stuff?
I mean, you already provided some certain things. You already said that this they have 10 employees. If it's 10 employees, then it's usually already good enough. We usually don't work with really small companies like 2, 3 people companies. The reason for that is they are usually startups. And startups, they don't know what they want. They don't know what they need. It's not because they're bad, just because it's the nature of an entrepreneur. You're solving the task for the first time in history. It might be a small task, but still. And they pivot often. And so in that sense, it's hard for us to ensure um, that the developer would be happy working for them long term. Also, many senior developers, they prefer not to work in the very chaotic environment. Also, the problem with really really small startups is that they like again less than 5 people, is that they usually either don't have a strong like technical management, um, or or they have it, but they just didn't figure out how to do it in this specific case. What we want from the client is for them to have some form of technical management. So there should be a CTO who would manage the developers. We could bring you a CTO, but bringing a CTO is very complicated. There should be a perfect fit between like the vision of the CEO, the vision of the CTO. It's just not our niche.
Mm.
In that case, you better look for like if you want to bring a CTO, the first technical person to the company, you better look into the executive search firms.
Okay.
But if they have 10 people, then it's pretty good. It will work out.
Okay. And we're still in the time, in the age of COVID, kind
Mm.
of.
Yeah.
How has COVID, which kind of impact has COVID had on your, on Coda Staffing?
Mm.
Positive, negative?
I'd say positive. We see a big cultural shift in the attitude towards remote work in general, in the whole world, not only in the US. And I'd say that before that, US companies were very strict about it. Like our employees only work from the office, um, and they regarded working from home as a benefit, as a privilege. Um, and right now, many of them start to think about it as a norm, as like this is how all of us should operate. And then again, and it kind of also moved so that now many companies say like, hey, and you could also come to the office. So now it's reverse. Now coming to the office is a privilege, and working from home is norm. And so because of that, in terms of work, there is practically no difference between an employee who works from home from the other part of the town
Mm.
and an employee who works from home from another part of the world. Um, of course, it depends also on the time zones, but that's also kind of one of the things that we say, that if the company is located on the East Coast, then the time difference is relatively small between Eastern Europe and, I mean, not small, but manageable between Eastern Europe and the East Coast. So in that case, we can guarantee a very big overlap to
Okay.
7, 8 hours. So.
Do you think outstaffing is the future of recruitment, or is it just something? Is it just something that's going to remain an option?
That's a really good question. That question makes me think. I don't know. I can't see the future. I think that certainly. So the reason why it works is because of this very big gap between. So we all know how American developers' salaries are the highest in the world, and highest by a margin, right? So the second country is Switzerland, and Switzerland has also very like living in Switzerland, cost of living is very high, so it kind of nullifies. And so this difference between the price quality ratio between America and Eastern Europe is is dramatic. So if this change would shift, if the countries would be more interconnected, more aligned with each other. So if we're talking about like 300 years into the future, and if we imagine the future is going to be more globalist, more global and less local, then probably it wouldn't matter, because probably the legal environment would change in such a way that all companies would be open to hire from anywhere in the world. But I think that in the next 30, 50 years, it is the future of recruitment. Yes.
Okay. And another future question: do you see yourself doing this for the next 10 years? I know 10 years is a lot. It's a lot, but just imagine.
Okay. Okay.
You don't have to answer the question if it's going to put you in trouble, but
yeah, no, I think that 10, like, I cannot plan myself for
okay, let's
10
say
years.
3 years.
3 years. Yeah, it's very possible. Yeah. I like what I do. I like to work with developers. I like to work with clients, and because of the nature of the business model, it seems like I'm helping everyone. Because it's one of the things that salespeople with empathy they fail at, when they're like, oh man, maybe I'm selling something bad, maybe I'm like hurting the world by doing that. And I really think that we help both companies and developers, and in that sense, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think it's a really great option for, Greg mentioned, for smaller companies, like a company with already with 10 employees can actually do invest in outstaffing. And and I think long term it's also sometimes good for your client, right? Because they have like a direct access to the developers. You don't have to reach out to you, and you have to reach out to developers. And although you're kind of a middleman, but that's another sense you're not a middleman, because the developer and the client, they're actually it's a one-way relationship.
Yeah.
So
It's one-way communication.
One-way communication. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think we're done.
Okay.
Let's wrap it up.
All right.
Thank you very much, Anton, for joining the show. I am I learned a lot about outstaffing, and that was actually the first time you reached out to me was the first time I heard about outstaffing. I haven't heard about it before, only freelancing, outsourcing. And so hopefully there are some companies out there watching, listening, and might be interested in outstaffing. It's a cheaper, or more, let's say, affordable option for smaller companies,
And faster.
and
Especially if you don't have a recruitment department.
okay, yeah. And thank you very much.
Yeah.